There is an old monument on the US-Canada line, the Peace Arch, built to make one promise feel permanent. This border is peace, this relationship is family, this continent is predictable. It has endured as a symbol of cooperation for more than a century, through world wars, through oil shocks, through NAFTA fights, through post-9/11 security integration, through every argument that ended with the same assumption: we're still on the same team. That assumption died the afternoon the White House dropped a statement that wasn't a proposal. It was a collar, a leash, a contract designed to make a sovereign country behave like a utility subsidiary before coffee cooled, before traders finished their first screen check, before half of Ottawa's bureaucracy even fully woke up. Trump's White House tried to lock Canada's energy future into a 10-year box. And then, less than 90 minutes later, Mark Carney walked out in Ottawa and said the sentence Washington didn't expect. The answer is no. What the White House wanted was simple, and it was massive: a binding 10-year agreement guaranteeing minimum Canadian exports of crude oil, natural gas, and electricity, plus a price cap structure and hundreds of millions per month in penalties if Canada ever tightened supply or priced above the cap. And here's the quiet part: Canada wasn't supposed to say no, not publicly, not cleanly, not like that. This isn't a tough negotiation. This is the deeper truth. The old relationship, built on trust, habit, and U.S. gravity, is cracking into contractual coercion. In the next 18 minutes, I'll show you the numbers inside the White House Energy Guarantee Ask, the language Trump used to frame Canada. Governor, drop off port, Canada lives because of the U.S. How Carney's play is not emotional, it's structural, and why your gas, power bills, and investment risk just got more political than you think. You're watching the architecture of a continent get stress-tested, not by China, not by Russia, by the country that used to swear it built alliances, not invoices. Don't look away. Trump called Carney. It was supposed to be a routine trade and security conversation. It became something else. The White House framed it like a deal: suspend tariffs, reaffirm NORAD, restore full intelligence sharing, in exchange for one condition: not coordination, not partnership, a binding 10-year energy guarantee that would lock Canadian exports and cap pricing flexibility. And this is where the trigger becomes a rupture, because the structure of the demand tells you what Washington thinks Canada is. Demand 1 was the export lock. Trump wanted Canada to sign a binding agreement guaranteeing energy exports to the U.S. at minimum volumes. He wasn't asking for stability. He was demanding control over a sovereign country's ability to redirect supply, respond to market shocks, and negotiate with other buyers. This is economic insanity dressed up as patriotism, because it's not America first. It's Canada fixed. Demand 2 was the price cap. Not just volumes, price caps too. The described terms included that Canada could charge market rates, but couldn't exceed a premium above prices charged to other customers. Read that again. It's not fair trade. It's a continent-sized attempt to force Canada to subsidize U.S. security and politics through energy pricing. Demand 3, the breaking point, was the penalty clause plus the language. If Canada ever reduced exports below the minimums or charged above the cap, it would face massive monthly penalties. And hovering over it all was the posture. Because in the parallel track, Trump's public language around Carney and Canada has included calling him Governor Carney, warning Canada not to become a drop-off port for China, threatening huge tariffs if Canada struck a deal with China, and even the phrase "Canada lives because of the United States." That's the insult. That's the tell. Not one sentence. A worldview where Canada is not an ally. Canada is a valve. Carney didn't explode. He didn't posture. He didn't match volume with volume. The reporting describes him buying time, saying he needed to consult cabinet and parliament and would respond within hours. Not weakness, calculation. Because Carney has said versions of the same principle in multiple contexts, we expect the U.S. administration to respect Canadian sovereignty. And face-to-face with Trump, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. Now look at the cascade, because this is what modern sovereignty looks like when it has to defend itself. The White House statement drops. Then Carney goes public and says no. And according to that same reporting, Carney adds something even more strategic. Canada has received purchase proposals from 11 countries on 4 continents and is evaluating them. Translation: you don't get to price control us with threats. because we can diversify. That's what happens when you confuse patience for weakness. We do evidence here, not vibes, evidence, clauses, quotes. The most important document here is not a leak. It's the structure described in the coverage, a binding 10-year guarantee with minimum export volumes for crude, gas, and electricity, price cap logic, and a penalty mechanism. That is not how allies behave. That is how an empire talks to a dependency. And Carney's line, "This offer is a trap, resource sovereignty," isn't just patriotic poetry, it's an economic diagnosis. Once you sign a constraint like that, you don't have leverage. You have obligations. If you want to understand Carney's real play, don't just look at speeches. Look at pipes, corridors, and export optionality. Reporting has described Canada's side actively thinking about energy leverage and negotiating position ahead of the CUSMA review, including the Keystone Corridor conversation. It described that Carney was aware of private sector interest around reviving parts of Keystone infrastructure and corridors when he raised the prospect with Trump. And it noted estimates that this could increase Canada's oil exports to the U.S., affecting leverage ahead of CUSMA talks. This matters because it tells you something counterintuitive. Carney isn't anti-trade. He's pro-optionality. He'll discuss Keystone, he'll discuss exports, but not under a 10-year U.S. price collar. Now look at how Trump uses tariffs in the Canada story, not as policy, but as a behavioral weapon. Reporting has quoted Trump threatening that if Canada makes a deal with China, it would be hit with a tariff against all Canadian goods, and framing Canada as a potential drop-off port for China. That's not trade policy. That's an ultimatum. And Carney's response line, "Canada thrives because we are Canadian," is the kind of national statement leaders deliver when they think the threat is no longer a negotiation tactic, but a worldview. This is the cleanest, most usable receipt of all because it's short, direct, and publicly attributable. In Reuters' coverage of a White House meeting, Carney is quoted saying, "It's not for sale, won't be for sale, ever." That sentence is doing a lot of work. It's not about real estate. It's about the entire posture toward Canada. 51st state rhetoric, governor framing, resource pressure, tariff threats. And it matches what broader reporting has captured about the relationship itself. In a BBC analysis, Carney is quoted saying the old relationship we had with the United States is over. So when Carney rejects the energy demand, it's not a one-off headline. It's consistent with an already declared strategic shift. Less integration, more resilience, more diversification. Let that sink in. Why Trump can't stop the bleeding once a leader like Carney decides the answer is no is because Trump's model is dominance hierarchy. He escalates until you submit. He names you until you shrink. He threatens tariffs until you fold. That works in boardrooms, reality TV, and zero-sum ego contests. But it fails in the place that matters more than any speech: capital allocation, supply contracts, infrastructure time horizons. You cannot bully long-term planning with short-term humiliation. Carney's model is different, and you can see it in the receipts. Where Trump says governor, Carney says sovereignty. Where Trump implies ownership, Carney says not for sale. Where Trump weaponizes tariffs, Carney talks about diversifying partners and expecting respect. Here's the core insight. In the 21st century, power doesn't come from being feared. It comes from being trusted. Nobody signs a 10-year energy commitment because they're afraid of you. They sign because they believe your rules won't change when your mood changes. And if your offer comes with a penalty clause and a cap, it's not partnership. It's a shakedown with paperwork. Trump demands loyalty. Carney sells predictability. And in a world where even allies are being threatened with tariffs and annexation talk, predictability becomes a premium product. This isn't abstract. This touches the stuff you pay for and the risk you carry. If a major supplier country is forced into a rigid export and pricing structure, every negotiation becomes political. Even the idea of Canada seeking other buyers, described as proposals from 11 countries, signals optionality. Optionality changes bargaining power. Bargaining power changes price outcomes. And if the White House decides to respond with tariffs, threats, or transit restrictions, the cost doesn't land on Canada as an abstraction. It lands on refinery margins, utility procurement, and households that don't get to shop for geopolitics at checkout. When the relationship between the U.S. and its closest neighbor becomes a cycle of threats and counter-threats, markets price in one thing: unreliability. and unreliability hits investment time horizons, supply chain financing, and the cost of capital for anything exposed to cross-border policy risk. Reporting on Canadian officials describes a climate where predictability is gone. Businesses don't expect stability anytime soon, and Canada is actively thinking about diversifying away from the U.S. orbit. When restore intelligence sharing is presented as a bargaining chip in an energy contract framework, that's a flashing red light. Because intelligence sharing isn't a coupon, it's a trust structure built over decades. And once allies start treating it like leverage, everyone recalculates. For generations, North America meant something to global investors: scale plus stability. If that brand turns into tariff roulette, sovereignty insults, and 10-year coercion contracts, then capital starts looking for the next boring, stable zone. And boring is worth billions. The peace arch still stands. The border is still there. The trucks still move. But the assumption under the pavement, the one that said this relationship is automatic, is gone. Because Washington tried to convert alliance into enforcement. Minimum volumes, price caps, penalty clauses, a 10-year lock. And Carney's rejection wasn't just Canada being difficult, it was Canada drawing a line around the one thing every country ultimately fights for: the right to choose. Carney has already delivered the sovereignty sentence on camera. It's not for sale, won't be for sale ever. Trump has already delivered the coercion language: Governor Carney, drop off port, tariff threats. And the overarching diagnosis has already been spoken plainly: the old relationship is over. So here's the verdict: Trump didn't put America first. He put control first. And when you demand control from a neighbor with options, the neighbor doesn't just argue. They redesign the map. Trump started the fire, and every bucket he throws turns out to be gasoline. How many times can the White House threaten the closest ally on earth before this stops being politics and becomes a national risk category? If you're in the U.S., do you want your energy security negotiated by penalty clause and insult, or by predictable contracts between equals? Drop your take in the comments. I read every single one. This channel tracks the real shift: the contracts, the corridors, the leverage, not just the headlines. Subscribe, hit the bell, send this to someone who thinks tariffs and humiliation are strategy. Because if the last few weeks taught us anything, it's this: the next response won't calm things down. It will escalate, and you need to be here when it happens.